Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB. And joining us to moderate tonight's discussion on the news media is a journalist and professor at the LSU Manship School of Mass Communication, Bob Mann. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Beth. As someone who prepares students for this field, I'm very interested in this topic, and it's an industry that has changed, has faced major changes over the last several years. Since 2003, newspaper advertising revenue has declined by 52%. In cable news, just 5 companies control 84% of the market share, and today 43% of the public gets its news from social media. Well, in addition to internal challenges, the news media as an institution has recently come under attack from public figures and commentators. Not surprisingly, mistrust of the news media continues to grow. Tonight, we explore how to restore that trust, ways to distinguish between fake and real news, and what role social media plays in blurring that distinction. All this and more on News About the News. When it comes to the news media, President Donald Trump has seized on a trademark catchphrase to describe outlets he disagrees with.
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
President Trump first tweeted the words fake news in December of 2016, and since then has used the term more than 66 times on his Twitter account.
You can criticize journalists for having bias, for not covering certain stories enough. But that's a different thing than saying that they're fake. So when you go beyond just saying that they might have a liberal bias to saying that what they're doing is completely made up, that's crossing a line, and that's a dangerous line for a democracy to cross.
Ray Pingree is an associate professor at LSU's Manship School of Communication. He says true fake news is an intentionally false story, often online. It acts as a bait to generate traffic and ad revenue. The second type of fake news is based more on perception than accuracy.
There's also certain, prominent politicians and media commentators who are accusing traditional journalism of being fake news. And that's an important other meaning of fake news these days, especially because it does blur this line of, bring up this question of what is real news.
President Trump's displeasure with the national media may be somewhat justified based on his coverage. According to a Pew study, the majority of news reports on his first 60 days focused on his personality rather than his policy. 2/3 of them were negative. Whatever the case, his constant attacks on the media have affected public trust, particularly since his election.
The decline in trust, particularly among Republicans, has been going back, like I said, since the 70s. And in fact, for Democrats, you see a pretty steep jump right after 2016, where Democrats in the United States are, suddenly a lot more supportive of the media than they had been just in, say, 2015.
Michael Henderson is the director of the LSU Public Policy Research Lab. The lab's statewide 2018 Louisiana Survey revealed that residents' trust in local media is high, 78%, compared to only 57% of respondents who find national news trustworthy.
Where we did see sort of a chink in the armor when it comes to local media had to do with whether or not people thought, local media, when covering political issues in the state, treated all sides fairly, or tended to favor one side. And we find that 60% of people in Louisiana say that, the media does tend to favor a particular side.
We let our readers down if we're not fair and balanced. And, I always say you want half the market mad at you at any given time because that means you're doing your job, right?
Judi Terzotis is president of The Advocate, Louisiana's largest daily newspaper. She says their reporters work diligently to include diverse sources and not have personal beliefs bleed into their coverage. The paper has seen historic growth in a struggling industry.
We were actually growing circulation revenue week over week, year over year. I mean, it's really an anomaly in our business.
According to the Pew Research Center, total circulation for U.S. daily newspapers fell 8% in 2016, the 28th consecutive year of declines. John DeSantis is senior staff writer of the Houma Times. He says declining revenues can contribute to media mistrust.
Smaller newsrooms, fewer people, makes for more mistakes, it makes for more misunderstandings. You've got one person responsible for 6 things in a day who might have been responsible for 1 or 2 things in a day.
Despite their ability to offer in-depth coverage, newspapers rank 4th as Americans' news source, behind television, social media, and radio. No matter the medium, good investigative reporting can be expensive, Pingree says.
Creating a story, going and doing all the work to find the facts is a more important part of the overall cost of news. And that also means that sources that skimp on that have a bigger advantage than they used to. So I think new media is accelerating that trend.
Social media is more likely to include intentional fake news. In the last 3 months of the presidential campaign, 20 false election stories generated over 8 million shares, reactions, and comments on Facebook.
I think social media may blur the lines between fake and real news to some extent, just because real news can be presented alongside fake news in the same feed. But I think the jury's still out on whether that's the case in terms of the effect on the audience.
Facebook will soon be conducting surveys among its users to rate news organizations and assign them trust scores. The Advocate is already using real-time feedback from its online viewers to drive coverage.
We're watching the traffic all day long in those stories, and that they're pretty much, readers are voting for what we should cover. You really have limited resources, so you have to listen to your audience. You have to listen to what they care about, and then that will dictate our coverage.
Faced with a vast number of news sources, today's news consumer needs to be much more discerning, Pingree says. That starts with not just identifying what is fake news, but what news matters.
News has always been about what's new and what's changing, and it is sometimes the case that means important issues are neglected. It's never been called importance; it's been called news. Faster news cycles make that distinction even more important for audiences to pay attention to. So it's up to us to, as news consumers, to choose the outlets that give us our vegetables, that give us the important stuff we need to know to understand the world.
Thank you for joining us.
Well, joining us to discuss the news media are some of those news consumers as well as producers. We have representatives from the Louisiana Press Association and residents with a particular interest in this topic. We also have 3 high school students from the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. Welcome, everyone. The Pew Research Center for Journalism and Media has been conducting surveys on the trust in the media for several years. Its 2017 findings are that Americans have only moderate trust in most news sources. When it comes to national news organizations, 52% of respondents have some trust in the content, with just 20% giving a lot of trust to what they see and hear from national news outlets. Local news organizations fare somewhat better. 60% of consumers of local news trust the content they receive. 25% trust it a lot. And when it comes to the perceived fairness of the news media, a strong majority of Americans, 72%, continue to say news organizations tend to favor one side in presenting news on politics and social issues. Just 28% say they deal fairly with all sides. So let's start there. Where do you get the majority of your news, and do you trust what you're seeing and hearing?
My name is Relina Ramarkiani. I'm with LIAC. And as a frequent social media user, I see only snippets of articles in my feed. And it's not until I make a point to read the full news article, I realize I was left with a false impression.
So you get most of your news from social media?
Yes.
Anybody else get most of their news from social media? Okay.
I think so.
Bria?
My name is Bria Grimiana. I am a spring 2018 graduate from Southern University. Kind of expounding on what she said, I do think social media is my main source of news, but I think it's more so of the instant factor. Like, if breaking news occurs, you immediately get that notification on your phone instantly. And so I think that is an advantage as opposed to waiting until the 5 o'clock news or waiting until you hear it on the radio or any other news source.
Now, when you both you say social media, you're talking about Twitter, Facebook. What are you getting your news?
Instagram and Twitter.
Instagram and Twitter.
I have the news apps on my phone, so
Okay.
I have like WAFB or
Okay,
WBRB.
so you're getting it online, not necessarily through social media.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody getting it through a traditional source? Scott?
I still read the Sunday paper, but you know, on a work day when I'm sitting in my office, I have 3 monitors up, and one of my monitors is my Twitter feed at all times, because when you're paying attention to legislation like I have to, you don't have time to go to the actual website for the advocate and figure out what's going on. You need to see Elizabeth Crisp's tweets about what's going on in the legislature or from the Manship State House Bureau. I need to know, and the best way to find that out is generally through Twitter.
Now, Lee, and please tell us when I call on you who you're with as well.
I'm with Gatehouse Media. I publish 7 newspapers around the state of Louisiana.
Okay.
And as a publisher of 7 newspapers, you can guess I read literally 7 newspapers plus every day. But my concern is it's the notifications that they mentioned. I think those notifications kind of distort what's really happening in the news. They create false urgency and you know, make stories bigger than they really are. I've actually made an effort to go turn all of the notifications for all news sites off on my phone, because I just think that they're creating a distortion, a false reality that we don't really live in.
Mm-hmm. Dale?
I'm Dale Clary. I'm a volunteer for the Convention of States Project. We were just laughing here earlier about we had to actually turn off our phones. I didn't know how to do that. I don't ever turn off my phone. But get a lot of news in that way. It may be the Channel 9 app. It may be the Advocates app. It may be any of those news sources. They have some of those news apps on there. I mean, it comes from everywhere. I read all of I read the Advocate and have been reading it since it was the Morning Advocate in the State Times. But I'm a consumer, totally a consumer, and I just get it from all kinds of sources, including things like Drudge Report Online, Fox News, CNN, all of it.
Yeah. Zoe?
I think it's important.
Zoe, tell us where you're.
Sorry. My name is Zoe, and I'm a student at the Manship School of Mass Communication. I think it's important that we have the notifications and the social media news, because not everyone has the time in their day to sit down and read the newspaper all day and get the information in that big of a block of time. A lot of people have busy lives but still want to be up to date. But I also think it's important that people get the context for the information that they're reading, rather it be by listening to public radio or reading newsletters or snippets of news that give more context to just the headlines.
So everybody's said something, everybody who's spoken has said something about where they get the news from, but I'd also like to remind you that second part of the question, which was, do you find it believable? Do you find it credible? So somebody want to talk about that as well, Marshall or Maddie?
My name is Maddie Malbrew, and I'm with LIAC. I get my news from the Apple News app that's on my phone, and it'll feature several different national news organizations. And just from clicking on maybe one article that I find with an interesting title, my first impression isn't to believe the first thing that I see or the first article. I like to fact check everything that I read with maybe 3 or 4 other articles to make sure that what I'm reading from one news organization isn't either biased or giving me false information.
Very good, very good. Marshall?
Yeah, I'm Marshall Mills with the Louisiana Family Forum, and I'd say most often I watch news in the morning when I wake up off of the television. Occasionally I listen to the radio, and I'd say that's what I trust most. Personally, I believe talk show hosts have a tendency to bring up facts and statistics, actually bring up real news and really impact back to that, discuss it with various people, and make sure it's really the most true information that is available.
Okay, good. Elizabeth.
My name is Elizabeth West. I'm with the Ville Platte Gazette, and I definitely get my news from a lot of social media outlets, and it's important for us working for a small town newspaper because we do have such a small staff that sometimes we just don't hear about everything that's going on. So when we get those notifications on our phones, we can, check into it. And if it's something that is local, something that our people need to read about, now we've been notified about it as well, and we can put a story in our newspaper for them.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
I'm like Elizabeth, Cress Aber, Kinder Courier. I'm like Elizabeth. You have to read television. You have to watch television, read newspapers, read what's coming over social media, because as a local newspaper editor, you have to find stuff that is local. And a lot of times, when you go on these websites, not all the news is real news, and then you have to start checking on it and making sure what's right and what's not.
Trifon, do you want to?
I mostly get my news.
Tell us who you are.
Yeah, I'm Trifon Bukovidis with LSU Manship School of Mass Communication, and I mostly get my news through applications in my phone, or I go online.
What do you read on? What do you read on your phone? What news
I have an application with all of Louisiana newspaper, and I mostly read the Advocate and the New Orleans Times-Picayune. And I really trust this media because I've been part of the Manship News Bureau, and I've seen the work of journalists. I see how they're covering the committees, and I've seen the process and how they're actually making the news. So I developed a deep trust in local journalism this way. So I can say that everything that I read from local newspapers is something that I do have to fact check, of course, with other Louisiana publications, but I can say that I have a great amount of trust in local journalism.
Great. Richard.
Richard Flicker. I'm a psychologist and on the faculty at Southern University. I get my sources from everywhere: newspapers, television, local and national news, and social media. I trust the national and local news and the newspapers far more than I trust social media. Do they make mistakes? Are there inaccuracies in the legitimate news sources? Absolutely. Having run for political office and been misquoted drastically, I know there are errors, but I trust the news, the legitimate news sources. I know how to distinguish between a journalist and a commentator, where most of the commentators are there to agitate and stir up the audience, and journalists hopefully are trying to report accurate news. So I think we need to look at all sources. If you're only getting it from social media, talk radio, or any one source, I think you're making a huge mistake.
You need a balanced diet, right?
Exactly.
You need a balanced diet. Has anyone encountered what they would consider fake news, or been taken in by fake news in some way, a fake news story? Is that something that you're shaking your head, Dale?
Sure. I mean, especially on Facebook, a lot of those things, you have to be careful with what you see. I've clicked on a few things, and then a friend will click back and say, bud, go check this out. This is not right. And I've done the same thing with some of my friends. So it does happen. I get more concerned, though, about the biased news than the fake news. It's not usually the facts. It's how you package it, and what agenda are you trying to portray when you write the news. That's what I'm more concerned about than something that's just flat wrong. You can check that kind of stuff.
Lee.
Well, I'm even more concerned about the echo chamber that these news aggregators and Facebook create, because they understand through algorithms what you're reading, and then they feed you more of that, and then you just end up reading one side, one direction, and the rest of it outside it gets pushed out. I mean, a great example is myself. I read a couple of articles on a news aggregation app that I use about the royal wedding, and suddenly I'm getting bombarded about stories about the royal wedding. I really wasn't that interested, but the algorithm decided I was. And it fed me all day.
So maybe your advice would be get off of those aggregators, get off of social media, and just go directly to the
apps. Go to the Picayune's app. Absolutely.
Right. Yep. Anybody else encountered fake news? Matt.
Matt Bailey. I live in New Orleans. I'm a native of Gina, Louisiana, which is in central Louisiana. Just following up, with the apps that give you that give you more of what you've already shown an interest in. And thinking about local news and looking at those stats that half of people get their news from television, and we watch television in the mornings, and it seems that in terms of keeping people's attention, the television news needs to keep your attention, and it seems like how they've learned to do that is by showing all the shootings that happened, all the major car wrecks, anything that really has a nice visual is what you see, and then they may give only a few minutes to important business happening at the Capitol.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further discuss news about the news. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing the news media, and joining us now is our panel of experts. Lynn Apcar came to LSU's Manship School of Mass Communication in 2015 after nearly 40 years as a reporter and editor, first for the Wall Street Journal and later for the New York Times. He teaches a special class on media manipulation and fake news. Jarvis DeBerry has worked for the Times-Picayune newspaper in New Orleans since 1997, first as a reporter and now as an editorial writer and columnist for NOLA.com. DeBerry was part of a team of journalists that was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. Peter Kovacs has been a newspaper editor in Louisiana for more than 3 decades. He joined The Advocate in 2013 and helped expand its reach in Louisiana by launching separate newspapers serving New Orleans and Acadiana, as well as more than a dozen weekly titles. And Lance Porter is an LSU professor and the director of the Social Media Analysis and Creation Lab. Porter has focused on digital media since 1995 when he built his first commercial website. His research focuses on emerging media and power. So before we go to our audience questions, if each of our panelists would briefly tell us from your perspective, should the public trust the news media? Mr. Apcar?
I would say generally yes, they should trust the news media, but it really depends on the details. What news media? I'm not a big fan of cable TV. I'm afraid that cable TV is the root of a lot of our problems today. I'm not a fan of social media, which I think is as a news media source, is also a deficient source of information. I think both can do good work and can do and provide good services, but in terms of trustworthy, factual news, information, and context, they come up short.
Mr. DeBerry?
I think generally you should trust the process. You should trust those reporters who have editors to report to. You should trust those publications that are honest about the errors that they've made. You should trust those sources that actually are open about who their sources are. And I think when you put all of those things together, then you tend to have a more trustworthy product than sources that are mysterious, that you don't know where they're getting the information from. You can't ever expect them to acknowledge anything that they've done wrong. So I think what you ought to be able to trust is this process. Okay, I am quoting this person accurately. If I misrepresent them, I correct it. I'm telling you who my sources were. I have editors who are going to check me. I have copy editors who are going to make sure that my things are correct. So I think that's what you ought to trust.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kovacs?
You know, I think the public has a better appreciation than people realize that the accuracy of media is tiered, and that there are some things that ought to be more trustworthy than others. And our aim at The Advocate is to be at the top of that pyramid. And we have experiences that tell us that people see us that way. You know, people call up or they send us a note, or, you know, my cousin saw on the internet that Martians landed on the Huey Long Bridge. And, you know, I want to know if that's true. And it's annoying to take those inquiries, but at the same time, it's reassuring because it tells me that people have trust in The Advocate and that they recognize that there are other forms of media that might or might not be reliable, and they want a higher level media, a more accurate, responsible, established media to tell them whether something is or isn't true at critical moments. And what could be more critical than having Martians on the Huey Long Bridge?
Dr. Porter.
So certainly you should trust certain types of media, but I think we have to realize that in today's news media environment, most of our news is being accessed through news feeds, and most of those news feeds are curated by algorithms, which are based on what you've clicked on before. And what we know from past research is that people tend to click on negative stuff. And so, you know, through a news feed, on a social media news feed, you are getting sort of a biased view of the news and more of a negative view of how things really are.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to go to our studio audience now for questions to the panelists, and we're going to start first with Madeline, who did not get a question in the first part of our show, but if you'll tell us your full name and your affiliation, please.
I'm Madeline Catroni with LIAC.
So I think before we can really find a solution to a problem, we should understand where it's stemming from and the root cause of it. So do you believe that it's corporations who are perpetuating a system in which journalists are expected to lie or change the facts in order to fit a narrative? Or is it those independent journalists who are causing it themselves, and how do we hold them accountable?
What's dangerous is systems in which people are rewarded financially for the amount of media, the amount of digital traffic they get. I mean, to me, that's a system for compromising what journalists are supposed to do. And, the truth is, if you operated a news site and you wanted to get more traffic, you'd get more traffic by operating a porn site. So if people were incentivized to behave that way, eventually everything would become a porn site. So I think it's a dangerous thing to reward people that way. And also, as a business model, it hasn't historically worked, because the amount of ad revenue that you get for those clicks is, digital ad rates are very low, and so you may get a lot of traffic, but you don't really make a lot of money.
Anybody else?
I think I hear you asking, are people being encouraged to be false? And I don't think that's the case. I think, as Peter said, that there is a perverse motivation that can be built into a system where you want the most attention, and it's not exclusive to the number of clicks you could get. It could come from the desire to be first. It could come from a desire I have to make sure that my story is out there before my competitor's story. That could produce sloppiness. That could produce carelessness. I do think there are things in the business model, whether it's internet or more traditional media, that responsible journalists have to understand and recognize, okay, this is a weak spot. This is a vulnerability that I have to be careful not to succumb to. But with the exception of those people who are deliberately setting out to be false and to be fraudulent, I don't think that anybody in any of these organizations that we've worked with could report of anybody who was deliberately trying to put stuff out to the public that they knew to be false.
I would say that I don't see that in the mainstream media per se, although I see some of it in cable. I think cable does encourage a tilting against a particular point of view, or and advocating a particular point of view. And I think it plays out on their websites as well. I do think we should acknowledge, as Jarvis alluded to, there are people who publish fake news, generate fake news, write fake news, dream up fake news for profit. And they're all over the world. There is for-profit fakery out there, and that's one of the reasons why the social platforms and sometimes cable's spin, I think, contributes to this lack of trust in the media.
And I would say for years, social media platforms were designed to feed you more of what you're interacting with no regard for whether it was true or not. So those corporations certainly have some fault in this system that we have now, and they're trying to fix that at this point.
Drew, I want to bring you in. You did not ask a question earlier, but if you'll tell us your name and what your question is.
Okay, well, I'm Drew White. I'm with the LSU Manship State House Bureau. At the Capitol, we work as a wire service to all the local papers in Louisiana that they don't have people that can go up and report at the Capitol. So what we'll do is write stories and send them out to the local papers in the state.
Great. So what's your question for the panelists?
My question was just, in the age of the Trump presidency, how has Trump differed from, former politicians like, for instance, Huey Long and Earl Long when it comes to attacking the press? Like, I know Huey and Earl Long attacked the Times-Picayune. Way back in the day, I read The Earl of Louisiana, and he seemed to be a pretty vocal critic of the Times-Picayune then. But just, how have things changed, and how is Trump different?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I think it's a great question. I would say there's a lot of alarm about what Trump is doing, and he's certainly effectively using new techniques to do it. but I don't see it as fundamentally different from what Richard Nixon did when I was young. It's not fundamentally different from what the Longs did, and the truth is that eventually, Richard Nixon, in a way, the media beat Richard Nixon, and in a way, Richard Nixon exploded himself by dint of his contempt for that. And so I'm less worried than people, I think, generally in the media are about what Donald Trump is doing.
I would take a slightly different tack. I think all of this is what you're talking about, whether it's the Longs or whether it's Trump or even Nixon to a lesser degree. It's a wave of populism, and we've had this in the country a lot. You could argue that Bernie Sanders himself was a different form of populism, and it has always been interesting or advantageous to tilt against establishment folks and establishment and institutions like the media. I think what is dangerous with Trump is that he has taken on a level of criticism about First Amendment freedoms, about press freedoms, about the right for reporters to ask questions, and that kind of antagonism or opposition to the press, even so far as it aids to refer to the press as the enemy of the people, is very dangerous.
And just today at an EPA event with Scott Pruitt, the AP and CNN were barred entry. That is more problematic, I think, than any fake news proclamation coming from the president. When you have reporters trying to do their job, trying to get information to the people, and there are armed security saying that they cannot come to hear what a cabinet official has to say.
So I also think Trump is unique in how he has used social media. It's different than any presidential candidate that we've had in the past. He's the first candidate to use it as an attack mechanism. And so that really plays into how social media works and the fact that negative information is prioritized. So it's an effective thing that he's been doing with it. So,
Dale, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, if I can follow up on what y'all are just talking about, but don't you think the fake news moniker that Trump has put on it wouldn't have any traction unless there's a significant number of people who believe him, that do think there is fake news? For example, one of the things one of the guys from LSU in the clip before the show here today said that since the 1970s and 1980s, Republicans or on the conservative side have grown less and less encouraged by what they see in the press. And we see the rise of things like Drudge Report and Rush Limbaugh and those kind of things. Doesn't that suggest that the establishment, normal media, the mainstream media is losing some credibility with Americans?
I think the best way to answer that would be to reference a book by Joshua Cooper Ramo called The Seventh Sense. And he makes the argument that all of our institutions are losing credibility, whether it's Congress, whether it's the media. You name an institution that has had a long reputation or hallowed reputation in the United States, and it's losing credibility. Part of that is our connectedness, where everybody is an expert in something and you can present yourself as an expert on social media. I mean, I think Trump is exploiting people's gullibility, and I think he's exploiting people's willingness to believe anything coming from their side. You know, it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. It doesn't matter if it stands up to reason or not. My guy is saying it, or my person is saying it, therefore I'm going to make it make sense, and I'm going to make it be true. I don't think that is a consequence of any media failings. I think it's a consequence of just an increased partisanship that he's just taking advantage of.
One difference between what the media was when I was young and what the media is now is rooted in technology. And when I was young, there were a relatively small number of media companies. They, to some degree, operated as monopolies. The Walter Cronkite was the the newscaster on CBS was called the most trusted man in America. I don't think Americans could even agree on who the most trusted man in America was today. But these were big companies. You know, they had very little competition. They were very profitable. They were very responsible and very professional. They paid well. They could afford to be all those things. And that was what the media was. You know, now the media is anybody who knows how to make a website. You know, anybody who calls a talk radio show. In a way, the president is the media. He has a following on a media outlet, Twitter, and he's like, a mountain generating its own weather with the way he creates news. And so, from my point of view, and I always look at it through the lens of an established media company in our state, the biggest newspaper in our state, I think that a lot of these statistics about loss of public confidence in the media, are about new forms of media that didn't exist, and not so much about the forms of media that have existed in this country, for half a century or a century. And so I think the polling that you see, sort of reflects that you have new outlets that didn't exist when I was young, and whose business model is not rooted in the idea of responsible consensus news. It's rooted in the idea of sensationalism or hate mongering. If you watch, you were talking about cable news. If you watch cable news at night, which I, by the way, don't do, I watch baseball, you would think that there was a crisis in America every minute. And there isn't a crisis in America every minute. America has its problems, but it's a strong, secure country. It's a place where half the people in the world would move to in a heartbeat if they could. But that doesn't sell. What sells is making everything into a crisis.
What advice would you give to aspiring journalists and young professionals who are looking to enter the media?
My advice hasn't much changed. Even though the technology has changed, Peter's right. Even though the environment has changed, Peter's right. Even though the competition has changed. My advice still to people who want to be journalists is to write. Report and write, and report and write, and go to a place where you can report and write and get good supervision. The best things in the traditional model, even though it's been exploded a bit, is you go to a place. I would say journalism education is formal the way we teach it, but it's also an apprentice model, meaning you go to a small paper, and there's plenty of them in the state, smaller by the day, but you go to there's plenty of newsrooms to go to cover the town and cover a community meeting and cover an official meeting and that kind of thing, and learn how to assemble facts, how to build a narrative, how to tell a story, and look at all sides of an issue, and then from there build forward with features and enterprise. I still think that's the way to go. It's really hard now because there are fewer and fewer jobs, and more of these places are no longer teaching hospitals the way they were when I got out of school.
Journalism is by its or well-practiced journalism is by its nature self-correcting. And there's no experience more frightening when you're young than writing a story about the president of the police jury, and that's not flattering, and having to go see the guy tomorrow and ask questions for another story. And that's a process that's self-correcting, and it forces you to learn to be fair and responsible. And if you're in a small community where everybody knows everybody, people look at your work, and the people who like the president of the police jury look at your work, and the people who think he's a crook look at your work, and they all offer you criticisms about what you should have put in there, or what you should have said, or what you should have asked. And I think the greatest learning laboratory is learning from when you write something or when you put something on television, you're essentially taking a position on what you've decided is the truth. And it's in some ways like writing a paper in college, and then your position gets attacked from different people who saw it differently, and you learn from that. And that's still a great experience. So, believe in yourself and do that.
I'll go to an even more granular level. know how to spell, know how to punctuate a sentence, know how to write. And I'm being completely utterly serious here, even though we're laughing. I think you will go far just by knowing the basic mechanics of the English language. And I think that sometimes gets overlooked. On the very, very basic level, I think if you have the mechanics down, the spelling down, the grammar down, knowing how to write a sentence, knowing how to tell a simple story, then you will really go far.
As the managing editor of a small local newspaper in Ville Platte, I find that it's hard for us to be able to make sure our readers get national news or hear about national news. So in y'all's opinion, what is one way that I could ensure that my readers are not only getting local news, but also some national news as well?
On the website or in the paper, or both?
On the website. The paper is mostly just the local news.
Well, the first thing you can do is, depending on what partners you have, whether you have any access to wires, is you can build a digest or a roundup of national news that gives people a few of the basics of what they need to know, right? And if you have access to Associated Press, which I know is not in all cases in all small papers, or you may have some other partnerships that allow you to take wire briefs and turn them into stories that give people a summary of the main stories of the day, even just 10 stories.
I think you should trust your readers to know that if they want to know what's happening with the budget in Washington, that they will be able to find the sources that will tell them, what's happening with the budget in Washington. I think if they're in Ville Platte, they are going to your website, they are probably more interested in knowing what's going on in the town. I mean, we're talking about technology here, and I think one of the benefits of technology is we do know where to go and how to get information about what's happening in Palestine right now. If they're coming to your site, they're probably interested in news about your town.
Speaking of trust in the readers, do you think your readers and readers in general and people who are watching cable news, as Lynn has alluded to, are sophisticated enough to tell the difference between what's opinion, what's news, what's analysis?
That's a good question, and that's a tough order, because in the traditional organization of, when I was young, in the traditional organization of the way a newspaper was put together or the way a television station presented its news, the differentiation between what was news and what was commentary on the news was pretty clear. And if you look at newspapers or newspaper websites, they have a differentiation between news and sports and opinion and other topics. But in an environment where people arrive at the news through social media, a lot of times, first of all, you don't know, you see something and you click through to it and you don't even know whose thing you're clicking through to. But also, you don't really take stock of the fact that this was labeled as an opinion piece. And so then you click through to it and you say, wow, that's awfully opinionated for, for a news story about what's going on in the Middle East. And the truth is, it wasn't designed to be a news story about what was going on in the Middle East.
Lance, you think social media or electronic media is contributing to that?
Well, it's a problem. I think there's a couple things. Certainly, a lot of people don't ever arrive at a news story. They're just looking at headlines going through their news feed and not clicking through. And so they see a headline and that's an opinion piece, but it's not labeled as such. And I think a lot of newspapers do a very poor job of labeling what ends up in a news feed as whether or not it's news or opinion. And then if you look at literally advertising now on a lot of major publications, we just did a study at LSU, and 30% of news audiences couldn't tell the difference between an ad and a news story. And I heard that presented as, well, 70% could. Well, 30% is a pretty big number. So yeah, we were literally eye tracking to see, and we told them to click on all of the things that were news and all of the things that were ads, and 30% never clicked on an ad, like a native advertisement.
Jarvis, I know at NOLA.com online, every opinion piece has opinion in the headline, right?
Yeah, that was a development because there was a lot of confusion before, and some of it owes to search engine optimization, where we're trying to write a headline that people are going to see and notice and want to read and share, and et cetera, et cetera. And that search engine optimization may not necessarily fit so well with big old opinion in the headline. But we have been a lot more deliberate in the last couple of years of putting that in the headline, because to my disappointment, many people did profess confusion many times. Well, why are you saying this? You're biased. Like, okay, an opinion by its very nature has a bias. So, so yes, I'm not. That doesn't insult me because I'm writing opinions. But it was always a continuing source of frustration of how many people were saying, well, this sounds like an opinion, when, like, yeah, it is an opinion. But as Peter said, when it gets shared, when it gets sent to Twitter, when it gets sent to Facebook, when someone is excerpting it and putting it wherever it is, we completely lose control of that.
So how are you and the organizations that you represent, what are you doing to get the attention and be able to influence our young people today when most of what they're looking at is social media?
I'll start with that, I guess. I just finished a class with college freshmen, and they were not students who were interested so much in journalism. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the class were science, math, engineering, would-be intended majors. But they hungered for just this. There was a growing realization that the social platforms don't provide enough context and enough reliable news. And they wanted to know a couple things: how to build a media diet, how to look at journalism and assess whether it was of good quality or bad quality or inferior quality, and what life skills I could give them to analyze information. And so one of the things we've done, and thousands of cards just like this have been distributed by the Manship School about how to look at how to judge a story, whether the sourcing is accurate and authoritative, whether the data is verifiable, whether the people who are quoted are named, whether they know what they're talking about. And if anybody would like a copy, or any of the viewers would like a copy, manship.lsu.edu, and you can download a version of this which folds out.
I always think there's a similarity between what people say about the media and what people say about politicians. And people have a contemptuous view of politicians, for example. And I always say, well, those are the politicians you elected. And if you have a contemptuous view of them, then really you have a contemptuous view of yourself, or of yourself and your neighbors, because you put them in there. You didn't figure out where their money came from. You didn't figure out what they believed in. You didn't figure out how they would vote. And I would say the same thing applies to the media. People love to criticize the media. They say, oh, I hate watching the TV news because it's all full of violence. Well, if it's all full of violence, it's because they've discovered that you'll watch it if it's all full of violence. And so I think the challenge is to our citizens, in the same way that if we need to elect better politicians, I think people need to look for authoritative sources of information and put in the time, just as you should in electing a politician, to understand where your information's coming from and whether you believe it.
Could I just interject one thing? I think this is the imperative of our age, meaning I think we're going to have to be our own editors. There are some very good editors in the state. Peter runs a terrific news operation. The Picayune has had a long history of great journalism, but that kind of expertise on the ground is becoming more and more scarce, and people are looking for information from all sorts of untraditional sources, and as a consequence, they have to be their own editors, and that's really what we're teaching to people who don't want to go into journalism but want to be a better news consumer. How do I get good information, and how do I trust it?
Let's go to Scott, and if you'll remind us who you represent, Scott.
Scott Sternberg. I'm General Counsel to the Louisiana Press Association. I represent media organizations in the state. I am fascinated by this discussion about fake news, particularly because the Supreme Court has said several times that there's no such thing as a false idea, right? this whole concept of the First Amendment is that there is a marketplace and that there are true things in the marketplace and false things in the marketplace. And so my question for the panel is, isn't the problem that people are voting with their feet? There are just more people in the marketplace now participating. And the fake news is actually an opportunity for those who are actually, going to tell the truth, to win people to their side so that they will vote with their feet and subscribe, or go online and read the traditional news sources that are telling the truth. Isn't this part of a process, and are we just kind of uber concerned with it right now because of the atmosphere in the country?
It is a process, and it's always been part of a process, but it's amped up now because the technology, the echo chamber effect of social media, the filter bubbles, all of that has put this out there. I still believe in the marketplace of ideas. I think it may take longer than it used to take because there's so many voices, as you're referring to, the volume of people and the number of players. But I still believe that ultimately the truth does win out. But I think the marketplace of ideas is still the fundamental core of our representative democracy and the role the press plays in it.
Well, what struck me when Peter was talking about Walter Cronkite and his being the most trusted man in America a generation or maybe 2 generations ago now, was historians of journalism have said that was the exception in American journalism and not the rule, that the majority of the time that journalism has existed in America has been a lot more like it is today than it was during the Cronkite era, where you picked your side and you went to your side, and these are the people who I want to see. So we are still trying to, I think, hold tight and hold fast to that concept that existed for this beautiful fleeting moment in time where people had this idea of nonpartisan, fair and balanced, unbiased reporting. But I think the norm is far, far outside of that.
That's a good point. And the truth is that fake news is not a new thing related to the internet. Fake news, the Salem witch hunt was fake news. The greatest piece of fake news in my lifetime was Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories. And all of that gave rise before the internet, using other technologies, chiefly book publishing and guys writing books and going on talk shows and talking about the incongruities in the Warren Commission report. Oliver Stone made a 3-hour motion picture about, which really implanted in young people's heads the idea that there was a big conspiracy involving the CIA and the military establishment to kill Kennedy. And all of that is fake news. And all of that fake news existed before the internet. And polls showed that, and still show, that more people think that the Kennedy assassination was a vast conspiracy than, one kind of loser who, by the way, was born in Louisiana, who sort of was a good shot and happened to be in the right place at the right time. And part of that is because it's just so difficult for us to accept the fact that something so important could happen from such a series of circumstances.
We are just about out of time, and this discussion is really getting kicked off, it feels like. But I want to give everybody a chance to make just a brief closing remark or comment. Lance?
I would just say that to add to kind of this discussion here is that we have these major platforms now that are in charge of a lot of our media information. So you're talking about Microsoft and Google and Facebook, and these are not companies that have news values as part of their mission statement. They're in the business of making profits and selling products and those kinds of things. So their objectives are different than traditional news organizations. So the fact that more and more people are getting their news from these platforms creates an inherent conflict, and it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to.
I guess I would say that news is like everything else, and you get what you pay for. And if you get free news from Facebook, then I don't know why you're outraged about the fact that it's crappy and inaccurate. If you want free food, it's not going to be very good. If you want free housing, it's not going to be very good. And I think people have to get used to the idea that if they want real news, they have to pay for it. There's a dawning realization, including among the people in this room, that what you get in the way of free news isn't necessarily accurate, and you don't know why it exists. And the Russian attempts to influence our election are a piece of that. All of that is rooted, all that information was spread to people who get their news for free. And I think people will come to the realization that you get what you pay for.
I think one of the benefits of going to college, and I'm not saying that it is exclusive to people who've gone to college, is that you are asked to develop a concept of critical thinking, where you learn how to evaluate ideas, evaluate theories and hypotheses, and figure out why they do or do not make sense. And it's disappointing to me that so many people I know who've been to college are still so gullible and credulous when they're seeing things on the internet. And I have had on multiple occasions to say, some of you all will share anything. Like things that clearly couldn't possibly make any kind of sense demographically, couldn't make sense mathematically, couldn't make sense at all if you had your brains operating. And yet people are showing this willingness to share it. Again, because I think this speaks to my side. This helps my argument, this helps my side, and I'm going to share it. So when you mention that we all have to become editors, I think we all have to also become a lot more conscious about not only what we are reading, but also what we are sharing. What are we putting out there? How are we contributing to this madness out there that people are willing to believe just about anything?
I'm optimistic about the core values of the press's role in the American democracy, but I do think that all of what we've been talking about tonight is going to get worse before it gets better.
Okay, that's a really cheerful way to end the evening. Thank you, Lynn. So we've run out of time for our question and answer segment, and we'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Apcar, Mr. DeBerry, Dr. Porter, and Mr. Kovacs for their insight on this month's topic. When we return, we'll have a few closing comments.
What a terrific conversation. There's so many things we could talk about in the future, but I was so impressed with the audience and with the panel as well. And it's committed me to thinking about what the role is of public media, and I think we have an important role to play.
And a very good reputation, I think, too.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have for tonight's program. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/publicsquare to share your comments on tonight's show. We would love to hear from you. You may also follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
With summer approaching, people in Louisiana take to the water. Coastal fishermen, though, may be surprised to discover restricted access to waterways that are considered public in any other state. Join Louisiana Public Square next month as it explores this issue and others on an encore presentation of Louisiana, Sportsman's Paradise or Problem. Thanks for watching and good night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.